Okay, let's talk about how not to break your Unity projects. One consequence of Unity being a kind of software developer's tool is you have a lot of freedom, but that means that it's also easy to break things. And so one way that I try to back things up before I am about to make a big change, a big change might be like installing a major component, like we're about to learn how to install the first person camera. It could break our thing, if we do it wrong. So we're going to make a new copy just to make a backup. So luckily, Unity projects are just folders. So I've been working on a project called Tutorial Project 1. I just made a copy of Tutorial Project 1 down here. Tutorial Project 1 copy. All I did was copy and paste it, the whole entire project. And so now if I ever need to go back to today's version of Tutorial Project 1 before I made some big change, I can reopen this. Sometimes I'll even make a zip file, which just compresses and makes the folder a little smaller and turns it into one file instead of a folder full of files. And then if you ever need it back, you can just unzip it to get it back to an openable Unity project. But I find that's a good way to be in the practice of keeping just a couple of backups of your project at big change points where you're about to do something and you think, uh-oh, there's a chance I'm going to install a bunch of things and I may mess something up. There are ways to uninstall packages that you install in Unity, but every once in a while I find the easiest solution for some problems is to just back up to yesterday's version. So it can be good to get in the habit of having backups of your projects. Another important consideration for keeping your Unity project healthy is just being aware of compatibility issues. So with a visual asset, things like textures, models, prefabs that look like something, usually the compatibility issues you might run into are with what are called render pipelines. For example, I was looking for water, and I noticed that that water is something that shows these compatibility issues a lot. There are some water packages that are designed for what's called the built-in render pipeline, and then there are some that are for newer render pipelines. A render pipeline is basically a graphics issue. How Unity processes graphics in any particular project. You can choose to make things in the URP, the Universal Render Pipeline, but the downside is everything every asset that you use will have to be compatible with it. Some older assets on the asset store just aren't. They were built for the original render pipeline. So I'm still building this tutorial in the original render pipeline, but there are two others that Unity could optionally use, the URP and the HDRP. So if you're going to work in the URP, every asset you download needs to at least support URP. It can be a little confusing to figure this all out, but most assets will have some kind of compatibility interface. They'll explain to you that we're specifically targeting this one. They might have a compatibility webpage like this one does, and it'll say specifically, we support these versions of Unity. Here are the render pipelines. We do not support the built-in. We do support the universal. We do not support the HD. So those are something that you could check before downloading, so you don't get yourself into a place where you're like, oh, I thought it was going to work, but then it didn't. It just usually with visuals, it'll just be a placeholder graphic, or it'll be like bright magenta, and you're like, oh, it doesn't look right, and that's about as bad as visual compatibility issues typically get. But if you're going to say download something that's more like a functionality asset, a new way for your player character to move, like a flying asset or something like that. You want to check specifically what Unity version it supports, and also if it involves input, like controls, what input system it supports, because there's been a new input system implemented in Unity in the last year or two, since 2019, I want to say. And some older assets still use the old input system. A lot of newer ones use the new one. In this tutorial, we're going to be using a first-person camera that uses the new input system. So that means we wouldn't also want to use assets that try to use the old input system. So I know for a new Unity user, some of this is like a lot to keep in your head. But if you're downloading something that changes how your game works in terms of controls, you are more likely to run into compatibility problems if you don't check Unity version and input system. If you're downloading something that's visual, just check what render pipeline they're talking about. Built-in is what we've been using in our tutorials. Universal is something you can use, but you want to start from scratch a project that says that it's a 3D URP project. It is possible to switch one you've made in built-in over to URP, but it takes a little bit of doing. So if you really need help with that, like you've already got a nicely built world, but all of a sudden you want to change to URP because you discovered some great asset or whatever, I can try to walk you through it personally.